Alrighty. We're in the second week of a series that um, where we're looking at the what ifs of Scripture. And in this series, we're going to explore the possibilities of making personal changes and choosing to live by principles that we find in Scripture. Last week, we looked at what if I forgave everyone? And we saw that when you forgive others, you experience the fullness of God's forgiveness and you experience the fullness of His peace. Today, we're going to ask the question, what if I take control of my thoughts? I think this is probably one of the toughest areas of spiritual discipline to master. I don't imagine that any of the subjects that we're going to be dealing with over the next few weeks are what you would consider to necessarily be easy. But this one probably ranks up there at the top with being hard, along with learning how to control your tongue, which we're going to look at in the future. I'm not going to tell you when because nobody would be here. But back to our thoughts, though. Thoughts are powerful things. Norman Vincent Peale made the famous saying, change your thoughts and you'll change your world. And I've heard quite a few folks over the years say something along the lines of, that's not that easy to do. You can't just change your life by changing your thoughts. To which I would respond, you're right on the first part, but you're wrong on the second. It's true that it's not easy. Anyone who's tried to change their way of thinking can tell you that that's the case. We have deeply ingrained thought habits that we typically turn that we turn to in response to certain situations, such as stress or fatigue or doubt or fear. Have you ever been around a smoker who was in a place where they knew that they couldn't smoke, but they kept reaching into their shirt pocket or into their purse for a cigarette? They do it over and over again and again, even though they know that they can't smoke right then. It's a subconscious habit to reach for that cigarette. That's the way we are with most of the things that we think. We're programmed to think certain ways about certain things, and we do it without thinking. We often think without thinking about what it is that we're thinking about. It's a lot of thinkings there, but it's true. If your natural tendency is to be negative and you do nothing to curb that natural tendency, then your worldview and your life experiences will tend to be negative as well. Habitual negative thinking leads to certain problems that can't be avoided. First and most important is that negative thinking robs you of a life of faith. It's very difficult to live with an attitude that says, God is bigger than my problems, when you approach every problem thinking, well, this ruins everything. It's difficult to live with the attitude that says, I'm blessed and highly favored by God, when every time a little inconvenience comes along, you say, well, isn't this typical? I worked with a pastor when I was in Topeka, whose immediate response to me on Thursday morning after one of our typical business meetings, which generally were not very friendly, was I would walk in and he would say, we have a major problem. Well, no, we didn't have a major problem. We had some attitudinal issues among some of the members, and quite honestly, we had some with him as well. Okay? And I worked with him quite a bit on being able to control his emotions during meetings and to learn to creatively communicate what it was that he wanted with the congregation. All of that I learned when I worked for the lobbyist that I worked for. Another problem is that negative thinking leads to inactivity. It leads to a what's the use kind of mentality. It causes us to think, why even bother trying? You know, nothing's going to work out anyway. Why go on a diet? I'll starve myself for a few weeks and then I'll give up and be right back to where I was to begin with. And all that suffering that I did would be pointless. Or, why should I bother trying to strengthen my marriage? My spouse doesn't really appreciate anything that I do. I'll just end up giving and giving and giving and get nothing back in return. Why even bother? When you give in to the natural tendency to think negatively, it's easier to give in to the temptation to do nothing. And because of that, negative thinking often causes isolation in relationships. It causes us to focus on what's wrong in the relationship, and it tricks us into thinking that nothing can be done about it. Also, seeing only the faults in others prevents you from seeing any of their good qualities, which prevents you from enjoying the fullness of that relationship. However, if you're willing to do the hard work of taking control of your thought life, it's going to make a big difference in your life. What kind of difference, you may ask? Well, for one, you'll be happier. It doesn't take a degree in brain chemistry to know that the person who thinks positive, uplifting thoughts will be happier than the person who thinks bleak and negative thoughts. Let's face it, being happy beats being miserable every single time. 2, when you take control of your thoughts, you'll develop a more accurate view of the world. One of the misconceptions about positive thinking is that it's nothing more than wishful thinking, and it leads you to being kind of a Pollyanna, I guess. But that's not the case. Actually, the purpose of positive thinking is not to look at the world through rose-colored glasses, but to look at the world through very clear glasses, so you can see what's really there. The purpose of positive thinking is not to create a fictional view of reality, but to see what really is, so that you can do something about it. Positive thinking doesn't mean that you avoid thinking about negative things. It means that you avoid thinking about things negatively. Negative thinkers say, this is a terrible situation and there's absolutely no solution. Positive thinkers say, this is a terrible situation, but I'm going to look for ways to try to make it better. Positive thinking is action-oriented thinking. It's solution-oriented thinking. And because of that, another benefit from being a positive thinker is that you become more productive. Instead of thinking, what's the use? You begin thinking, what do I need to do now? When you take control of your thoughts, you spend less time thinking about things that take you nowhere. You spend less time reliving the past and reliving your regrets. You spend less time thinking about what could have been, and you spend more time thinking about what can be. if you'll make the effort to control your thought life, it will improve your emotional state. It'll improve your spiritual life, your relationships, and even your ability to do whatever job it is that you're doing. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you take control of your thought life? Well, tonight we're going to look at 3 steps that you can take. First of all, you need to think on purpose. Start thinking about what it is that you're thinking about. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5, the end of that verse, he said, taking every thought captive to obey Christ. Now, just as an aside here, I used to do a children's sermon in many of the churches that I've served in over the years. And I would start each children's sermon by holding up a Bible and saying, the Bible is our guide for living. And if there's not an exact verse to match the situation that we're talking about, there's a principle in here that we can follow for our lives. This verse is an example of that. Okay? Paul is speaking here and defending his ministry. However, the truth at the end of this verse is one that we need to live by. Take control of every thought. Take every thought captive to obey Christ. Now, let me ask you, what kind of influence does the world have on your belief systems and your most basic ideas about life? The world teaches one philosophy, and the Bible teaches another philosophy. And we need to make sure that our thinking is aligned with the biblical model. Unfortunately, when you live out here in rural Texas the way we do, you get to spend quite a bit of time alone with your thoughts. Just driving to the store, you got 30 minutes by yourself. And what I've discovered is that left unchecked, your thoughts can take you to all kinds of crazy places. For example, you see or hear an ad for a truck or a car, and you think, man, that's a nice truck. I wish I could afford it, but I can't afford anything. Not in my camp, not with my income, not with the demands that I have, and not with this economy. I don't see how it's ever going to get any better. I guess the days of prosperity are pretty much over. I sure do wish I'd taken advantage of some of the financial opportunities that were there a few years ago, like Bob did. Man, he's done well for himself. It couldn't have happened to a less deserving guy. I'll never forget what he said to me. Boy, did Bob ever make me mad. You know, what I should have said? I should have stood up to him and said, Bob, you so-and-so, let me tell you what I think about you. That's what I should have said. But I can't stand up to people. I've been this way all my life. It's probably because of my dad. I could never stand up to him. Boy, did he ever make my life miserable. And I still don't measure up to what he expects of me. I guess I never will. Why do I even bother? And on and on and on. All from one ad for a new truck. Now, that's just an example. But you see how that one little advertisement can dominate your thinking for an entire afternoon and lead you into a negative non-productive state. That's why we need to take every thought captive. And when that thought enters your mind, you need to grab hold of it before it has a chance to start wandering. Dissect it, evaluate it, weigh it against what Scripture says, and see how it measures up. The first step to getting victory in your thought life is to learn to think on purpose. Secondly, think with a filter. Now, this might sound suspiciously like some kind of a product endorsement here, okay? But you can hear commercials, you can see commercials on TV for a Brita water filter or a Brita pitcher, water pitcher kind of a thing, okay? Does anybody here have any of those? Anybody have one? You do? Some of you do? They advertise that it makes all the difference in the world. Your water will taste better, so your coffee will taste better, your spaghetti will taste better. Everything that you use water for or in will taste better after it's been through the filter. Why is that? It's because the filter captures all the impurities that are in the tap water, and it only lets the pure water pass through. Now, I had one of those when I lived in Jasper for a while. This is not going to speak highly of the water in Jasper, okay?
It didn't last very long.
Yeah, and with what I was making, I mean, the thing would clog up. I mean, you pull it in and it says it'll last for 3 months. No, it would last maybe 3 weeks, and then it'd clog up just because the water was apparently so bad in Jasper, and those filters were expensive. And at that time, I just thought, okay, it's not killing anybody else, so I guess it won't kill us. So I took the whole thing off and threw it away. But in the same way, Paul suggests that we use a filter for our thoughts. In Philippians 4:8, he says this, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, and if there is any praise, dwell on these things." Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to try to memorize that little list, okay? There are 8 things listed here. Pretty simple list for you to try to memorize or get down anyway. As you think about what it is that you think about, run your thoughts through these filters. Is it true? Is it honorable or noble? Is it just or right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it commendable or admirable? Is it morally excellent or praiseworthy? In other words, is this thought even worthy of my time? If so, then give it your full attention. Web designers use a little trick when you go to one of their web pages that they actually don't want you to go to anymore. It's a little line of HTML code called a redirect. That way, if a website or a web page has changed names or moved to a new location, you go to the old site and it will automatically redirect you to the correct one. Pretty handy little tool. It's a good tool for your thoughts as well. When you find yourself thinking something that you shouldn't be thinking, practice a redirect. Move your thoughts to something good and clean and pure and praiseworthy. That's the second step to taking control of your thought life. And here's the third thing that I want you to see. Think in the direction of change. George Bernard Shaw once said, "Those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." Now, he may not have realized it, but he was indirectly referencing a biblical principle of transformation. In the book of Romans, in 12 verse 2b, it says, "But be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And then in Ephesians 4:23, Paul says, "You are being renewed in the spirit of your minds." Transformed behavior begins with a transformational thought life. I quoted Norman Vincent Peale a little earlier, who said, "Change your thoughts and you'll change the world." More significantly, it can be said, change your thoughts and you'll change yourself. Taking control of your thought life doesn't just mean that you learn to think pretty things. It means that you become a new person and make a difference in the world around you. The right attitude is to say, "God, I want to learn to think differently because I want to learn to act differently because I want to be a different person." 1 Peter 1:13 says, "Therefore, with your minds ready for action, be serious and set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." The contemporary English version of that says, "Be alert and think straight." So why did Peter say this? It's because thinking leads us to doing. Taking control of your thoughts means that you think in the direction of action. And if that's the case, then you need to ask yourself, what is it that I need to do? Henry David Thoreau said, "As a single footstep will not make a path on the earth, so a single thought will not make a pathway in the mind. To make a deep physical path, we walk again and again and again. To make a deep mental path, we must think over and over the kind of thoughts we wish to dominate our lives." Taking control of your thought life is hard to do. It's not a one-time event. It is a daily process. But the rewards are worth the effort. If you'll learn to think like God has told us to think, you'll experience transformation in every area of your life. Because right thinking always leads you in the direction of a right action. Change your thoughts, and you will change your life, yourself, and the world around you. Take out your prayer sheets.